This is your host, Town Manager John Potter, broadcasting from the BCTV studios in Brattleboro, Vermont, with another edition of the Town Matters podcast. This podcast is a brief update on what's happening in Brattleboro town government. Today, I'll give you an update on the Selectboard's meetings that were held on Thursday, October 16th and Tuesday, October 21st. And then I'll review the agendas for their next regular meeting that will be held on Tuesday, November 4th, and a listening session scheduled at the Brooks Memorial Library for Wednesday, November 12th at 6:15 p.m. to go over the fiscal 27 general fund budget. Also, I'll go over a few announcements before wrapping up. On the meeting of October 16th, there were 7 items on a consent agenda. The board approved a $48,300 change order for the William Street retaining wall project to set anchor rods deeper in the bedrock. They committed up to $12,000 from the Global Warming Solutions Fund to be used for solar street lighting on Elliott Street. They approved a parade permit for the annual Horribles Parade up Main Street on Halloween. They ratified the low bid for fiscal year 26 fuel oil from Discount Oil for $2.495 per gallon. They approved a parade and open-air permit for the No King's Day that was held on Saturday, October 18th in downtown Brattleboro. They renewed a third-class liquor license for Echo Restaurant and Lounge at 69 Main Street, and they renewed a first- and second-class liquor license for Hool's Wine at 972 Putney Road. Following approval of that consent agenda, on October 16th, the board first heard from Melanie Kahn, Kate Traskus, and Aaron Skaggs about the Brattleboro Festival of Miniatures, which will be held during the month of December in Brattleboro. And the board discussed the location, the properties involved, and the larger idea behind this event. No motion was required or taken on this item. Following it, the Human Services Committee Chair and Vice Chair David Miner and Sarah Turbo entered the meeting to talk about the work of the Human Services Committee. They discussed the application process and the history of the committee. They talked about the prioritization of awards and several other matters that board members and the public raised for discussion, but no motion was required or taken on this item. It was just an update. Following that was the Bittersweet Lane request. John Vidal and Michael Sersasimo from Sersasimo Industries requested to turn this street, Bittersweet Lane, into a public road. And following some discussion, the board moved to lay out Bittersweet Lane from the intersection of East Orchard Street to its terminus as a Class 3 town highway, and to conduct a site visit on that matter and a public hearing prior to finalizing this request. That passed by a vote of 5-0. The next item was Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust Scattered Site Grant and a public hearing for this matter. Bruce Whitney, the Wyndham and Windsor Director of Homeownership, discussed a grant and a funding request, and the board moved to adopt the resolution authorizing submission of a grant application for a Vermont Community Development Program Scattered Site Grant in the amount of $540,000 to support Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust's home repair program, counseling, advocacy, and first-time homebuyer services. That motion passed by a vote of 5-0. Next, there was a discussion on the Black Mountain Road discontinuance project, and DPW Director Dan Tyler and Zoning Administrator Brian Bannon entered the meeting to discuss this project, its costs, and the impacts of the project. The board, following several questions and discussion around this, authorized the town manager to accept the bid from MSK Engineers in the amount of $44,176 for a scoping study to look into the discontinuance of a segment of Black Mountain Road and the replacement of 2 culverts, 80% funded by the Municipal Highway and Stormwater Mitigation Grant Program with a 20% match. And that motion passed by a vote of 5-0. Next, the board took up the second reading of various parking ordinance revisions. DPW Highway Superintendent Darren Pacheco and Assistant Police Chief Jeremy Evans entered the meeting and discussed these ordinance changes, noting that there were no recommended changes during the first reading. And so following this hearing, the board approved the changes to the Brattleboro Code of Ordinances, Chapter 16, Traffic, as they were presented, and adopted them as the final reading, with the amendments incorporated into the town's ordinances as directed by the Selectboard, and that motion passed by a vote of 5-0. Next item on the agenda for October 16th was a update on the Regional Assessment District concept, and Town Assessor Jennifer Burnell informed the board of work that's happening on this idea. No motion was required or taken on that item. Following that, the monthly fiscal year 26 budget update was given for August, and staffing was discussed, as well as parking revenues, various line items for expenses, the rooms and meals revenue, and several other issues. And the board moved to accept the fiscal year 26 budget update for August as presented, and that passed by a vote of 5-0. And that's what happened on October 16th. The board turned things around quickly and had their second regular meeting in October on Tuesday, October 21st. And at this meeting, there were two items on a consent agenda: approval of an application for a $20,000 Vermont Better Roads grant to rehab a portion of South Street, and official announcement of several recent town board and committee vacancies. And those two items were approved on consent by a vote of 5-0. Under regular business, the board first had an update from Russell Bradbury Carlin and Casey Viato from Interaction on the work of Interaction and their history. And they talked about restorative justice, the increased level of emergency calls in town. The board asked questions around drug trafficking, talked about referrals from the Brattleboro Police Department for restorative justice. They talked about child safety zones and housing for youth. No motions were requested or taken on this item. Following that, the BDCC SEVIDS update was provided by Adam Grinold, Laura Sibilia, and Jen Strompson, who entered the meeting to let the board know about work that they've been doing over the past year. After hearing that presentation and some discussion, there was a motion to allocate $36,147 from the revolving loan fund to fund the SEVIDS work for fiscal year 27. That motion passed by a vote of 4-0 to 1 abstention. Next was an item titled Connecticut River Pathway Project, and Alex Wilson and Jason Cooper from the Friends of West River Trail came into the meeting and discussed a long-term goal of them to connect the West River Trail to downtown, as well as connecting trails from downtown toward the Fort Hill Railroad Bridge to the south out by the wastewater treatment plant. The Friends of West River Trail announced that they had secured an easement from Roberts Energy in the area nearby where the new train station is being built. And given that easement, the board asked whether the Selectboard would be interested in extending the trail at no cost to the town using volunteer labor and donated materials to eventually link Brattleboro's trails to 80 miles of New Hampshire rail trails and justify the maintenance of the Fort Hill Bridge. And there was a motion to authorize the town manager to execute an easement to the Friends of the West River Trail over tax map parcel 00330004 for so long as the property identified is used as a public trail. And that is practically a mile-long tax parcel that the town owns right along the river that runs from the Roberts Energy property down to the Fort Hill Bridge. And that motion, after some discussion, was passed by a vote of 5-0. The evening was getting late, and the next item on the agenda was town-owned properties update, but the board moved to table that discussion until a future meeting, and that motion passed by a vote of 5-0. The final item for the meeting of October 21st was reviewing legislative priorities with the Brattleboro legislative delegation, and Representatives Emily Kornheiser, Molly Burke, and Ian Goodnow, and Senators Nader Hashim and Wendy Harrison joined the meeting, and they talked about a lot of things. I would encourage folks who are interested in learning about the upcoming legislative session to take a look at the video on BCTV for this meeting. But just to give you a quick summary, they talked about the political and fiscal outlook for the upcoming legislative discussion, the fact the state is facing declining revenues, inflation pressures, and the end of COVID-era federal funding. They talked about various federal policy changes, and the Select Board reviewed their 5 priorities for this year with the legislative delegation, including increasing revenues at the municipal level. They talked about the possibility of state revenue sharing. They discussed child safety zones and the backlog and lack of funding at the Justice Department, as well as efforts to get a drug court in this area. They talked about funding for state police and the state drug task force. There was conversation around housing as a town priority and the ability to move a bad tenant out of a building, or really non-tenants as well. And then the final priority that they talked about with the legislative delegation was financial responsibility and things such as the hotel program and screening for vouchers, shifting education taxes away from the municipal property tax, and other items that affect the Town of Brattleboro budget. There was no motion on this item, and that closed out the meeting, which adjourned at 10:34 p.m. The next Select Board meeting is a regular meeting scheduled for Tuesday, November 4th at 6:15 p.m. That will be held in the usual meeting space in the Select Board meeting room at 230 Main Street, and this is what will be on the agenda for that meeting. There will be a 4-item consent agenda. The first item on the consent agenda is several contracts for parking lot snow removal this winter. There will be a request to authorize application for a courier grant by the library in the amount of $683. And then second-class liquor license for Mac's Convenience Store, also known as Circle K, at 564 Canal Street, and an entertainment license for events to be held at Hannah Ruth Massage and Movement at 139 Main Street. Following the consideration of the consent agenda, the board will take up some very interesting regular business. First off, Public Works staff will join the board to discuss a solid waste implementation plan. And staff have been working very hard on solid waste since the spring and the discussion of the FY26 budget, and are now prepared to come back and talk with the board about options for moving forward with solid waste collection and disposal in Brattleboro. And if that affects you at all, I urge you to tune in to this conversation on November 4th. Following the solid waste item, the town manager, that's me, will present an FY27 proposed general fund budget. So if you're interested in knowing where the general fund budget may be going for next fiscal year, that would be a good part of the meeting to listen into. Following a discussion of next year's general fund budget, there will be an update on this year's general fund budget, as well as the parking and utility budgets for the first quarterly review for fiscal year 26. And finance staff will join the meeting to answer questions from the board and the public. Following that, the fire department will give their quarterly report, and after giving that report, they will stick around in the meeting to go over the EMS billings and collection policy with the board and see if there are any changes to that the board wants to consider. And the final item for this meeting will be committee appointments. So the Select Board has also tentatively scheduled a meeting on Wednesday, November 12th at the Brooks Memorial Library as a special meeting for a further fiscal year 27 budget listening session. So if you like or don't like or want to suggest changes to the fiscal year 27 budget, please come out on November 12th at the library for this listening session. And the board has several questions for providing feedback that they'd like folks to consider, and they really want to hear from you about where the budgeting is headed for the town. Under other announcements, the Nelson Withington Skating Facility has opened for the season. Visit brattleboro.gov/recreation for detailed information about the skating rink schedule, the rates, and various events that are going to be held there this winter. The Brooks Memorial Library will be hosting an event called Library Insider on November 19th from 6 to 8 p.m. This open house will provide a behind-the-scenes look at how this dynamic community resource works. There will be food, fun, games, surprises, and swag, so I encourage you to learn more about the library on November 19th. And to end with some good news, we finally had some rain. The burn ban in Brattleboro, which had been in effect since early September, is no longer in effect. The public may once again apply for burn permits on the town's website by visiting brattleboro.gov/fire. So that's a recap of what's happening in town government in Brattleboro. Please reach out to me at the town manager's office or by email at townmanager@brattleboro.gov if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to hear on this podcast, or if you want to discuss anything related to Brattleboro town government further. There's lots of additional information on the town website, brattleboro.gov, about what's discussed at the Selectboard meetings, so please check in there for agendas, reports, and backup materials. Thank you for listening, and please check in again soon.